All right, so welcome again to Big Ideas in App Architecture. I'm your host, Tim Vale, and I am very excited today to be joined by Gregg Mojica, the CTO and co-founder of Alloy Automation. Now, Greg, you and I had a chance to kind of catch up a few weeks ago and had what I thought was a great conversation. And we really kind of started by um, kind of learning a little bit about what you're doing today with Alloy Automation, kind of what your background is. I thought you've got at least in my mind, a very fascinating founding story. Kind of the timing of it all was kind of interesting. So maybe let's get kicked off by just tell us a little bit about you, kind of certainly Alloy Automation, how it all came together, and then as the podcast certainly is titled, we'll maybe spend a little bit of time talking about architecture and software and all the other stuff. But first of all, I'd love to just hear about you again and how you got here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. Interesting story, kind of how we got here. My background, I'm originally an engineer. So, wrote code way back, starting like 2009, 2010, that era. Got in basically when the App Store was a big thing. So I started in iOS development when all the rage was, the iPhone. And this is around that time when the App Store had launched. And so a lot of good stuff, a lot of exciting stuff happening at that point in time. Obviously pivoted into web development, went to work for a company called First Data, big financial services business. You can look me up online. You'll see that I guess I shouldn't lie about my age. I'm relatively young still. So I ended up actually not going to college and going directly into industry. And that's where I ended up landing at First Data. And we did a whole bunch of stuff there for a few years, everything from their developer APIs to some of their marketplace tools, you name it. And I always wanted to start a company. My co-founder and I, longtime friends, and we thought to ourselves, we both had experience in the commerce space, mine at First Data, which ultimately became Fiserv, and she had worked at Wish previously. And so we kind of joined forces and started to think about some of the issues in commerce. And we really realized that automation and integrations were a huge problem. And there's a bunch of tools out in the space today, but what we realized is that a lot of these tools are not very good for the complex requirements that a lot of commerce companies need. And so we put our heads together and said, let's build a prototype. We got into YC. So this was 2019. Really, this initial project was a side project at the time. We didn't anticipate it to be a company. We knew we wanted to start a company, but we weren't sure that this would be the company, and we weren't sure how things would pan out as things typically do. And so we built this thing, launched on Product Hunt. One day, got to number one of the day. We were totally shocked, blown away. We thought to ourselves, okay, maybe there's something here. So around that time, we actually had one of the founders of Webflow reach out and said, look, if you build this, I'll fund it. And this was kind of the moment in time where we started to realize, okay, maybe that we actually have something on our hands. So it had some exciting traction. That was what drove us to apply to YC. We were very fortunate to get into YC. And so we did the Winter 20 badge. And that was
just do me a favor, because obviously being in the startup world for a while, I've heard of YC, but I don't think a lot of people, maybe they do. I have no idea. But just for a second, kind of talk a little bit about YC is, because it is really fascinating. But I'm not sure that everybody kind of understands the concept there or what it is.
Definitely. So YC is Ycombinator, and right. What it is basically kind of the famous incubator out in Silicon Valley. They're based in Mountain View, and they funded basically all of the major success startups in the past decade. So things like Airbnb, Dropbox, you name it. The list, there's just hundreds of companies on this list, right? And so getting into YC is a huge stamp of approval from the perspective of, hey, they're backing you. And then they give you this great network of other founders and just network and advice and mentoring and so forth. That really is pretty invaluable, especially when you're starting off and you're not necessarily sure what how things are going to go. So it's basically a 3-month program, and they have 2 batches. They have one in the summer and one in the winter.
Interesting.
We did the one in the winter, and it's interesting because you think of it kind of like a very structured program, but it really is whatever you make of it. It's kind of like college.
Interesting.
Well, I guess I shouldn't be saying that though, because I didn't go. But it's basically whatever you make of it. And so it's an unstructured program in the sense that they have programming, but you can kind of come and go as you want.
Okay.
They have, they bring in some of their previous founders. So we had, the Airbnb founders talk to
Oh,
us. We
really?
had a whole
That's
bunch
kind
of
of
other
neat.
founders speak to us. Yeah, it was really neat. And then they, they do one-on-one mentoring, and they coach you basically through building your product. And the companies that are in this program are companies that are, they're just getting started. These are typically not companies that are, established or, in the market already. They have no product. Maybe there's just one or two founders, and
Hmm.
that's it. And so, they're coaching you through how do you build that first, prototype,
Yeah.
to get the first
Yeah.
customer, how do you iterate, how do you raise money, and go from there.
And of course, as I'm sure you're going to continue telling, I mean, you guys picked kind of a, I don't know, fortunate or unfortunate year to kind of get things kicked off. I know we talked a little bit about that before, but so, I mean, 2019, we all know what comes, of course, later in the year in 2019, or at least what's named for that. So yeah, what was kind of, you guys got in, got started, then what happened?
What was funny is we get into YC, right? And I'm, super happy. I mean, it's I'm like, ecstatic. My co-founder is ecstatic. We're like,
We
this is
made
this
it.
is the best thing
We
ever. We
made it.
made it. And so we're super excited. We get into YC, and then everything's going great. January, except we did the winter batch, right? So it's in
Oh,
January to
okay.
March,
So you even did the winter batch. You're like right on the edge of,
right on the edge.
yeah. Okay.
Like
It's going to be great. We're going to be
totally. No, we're
next
everything's
Elon Musk,
everything is we're on top of the world,
top of the
right?
world, the
Literally.
best.
It's amazing. And then all of a sudden, right? So right, January, February goes by, everything's great. And it's funny because at the end of February, it's fundraising season for Y Combinator companies is typically the last month, right? So you finish your product, you get some customers, and then you raise some money, raise your first round. And so they gear you up basically in March at the end of the batch to raise money. So in February, one of our group partners sits us down and says, "Look, guys, you want to be conservative with equity. You don't want to raise too much money. You want to be smart, raise from the best possible investors you can get, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of money out there. It's a really bright future. Just make sure that you're being smart about it and doing it the right way."
You're the
And
top
we
of the
took that
world, Greg.
advice.
Top of the
Top of the
world. You
world.
be conservative. Nothing to worry about.
Like, this is fantastic, right? Nothing to worry about. We've got Y Combinator's backing. We're gonna raise a bunch of money. We're gonna be great,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Well, there's this thing called COVID. I bet you haven't heard of it. It's happening overseas, starting to trickle into the U.S. Where and if you remember the progression of COVID, it's coming in, of course, from the east, and it's going east to west, right? And it's hitting, the first thing it hits is West Coast in the United States. Seattle gets hit really hard, right? So early, the first week of March, Seattle is getting a bunch of COVID cases. People are freaking out, right? San Francisco, I think, was the second major city in the
Yeah.
country to
Yeah.
get COVID, and we're in San Francisco, right? So now all of a sudden, people are starting to panic, right? And I remember, the mayor of SF says, we're putting in shelter in place. You can't be in person anymore. So YC, of course, there's no playbook for this, right? YC is winging it just as much as everybody else is. So we get on a Zoom call like 2 weeks later. Keep in mind, it's a Zoom call because we can't even be in person anymore. The same guy who told us, look, you got to be, super conservative with equity, says, you got to raise as much money as you can, as fast as you can, from whomever you can. And I mean, and that was the right advice at the time. Don't get me wrong. He was giving good advice. But it was funny because I'm scratching my head going, didn't you say the exact opposite, just 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
That's the startup world. You've got to be adaptable, and you've got to
Yeah.
be able to make decisions, with short notice, and, based on the information you have. And that was our world. So we started our fundraise, we officially started the fundraise, like basically the day that the markets collapsed. I think they call it Black Monday 2020. Things were just chaos. I mean, just like, we had investors, in Silicon Valley, if you have a deal, a handshake deal, that really means everything. It's a very much kind of a word of mouth sort of trust situation. We had investors, who would never have done this before, saying, look, I'm super sorry, but like, my stock portfolio went down 40, 50%. I can't write the check anymore. Financially, it's not a smart idea. And it was, it was crazy. Like, I never forget it. It was the craziest time.
Yeah, I appreciate you telling that story, because I mean, I know COVID, obviously serious business, and it's been a scary time, but I think for you and your co-founder, I mean, and certainly your business, what an interesting kind of, unfortunate, but interesting, nonetheless, kind of time to be starting your business. And hey, look, here we are. What is it, 2023? We're all still here. You're still here, and you have a very successful startup. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of like, what is Alloy automation? I know you and I've touched on it a little bit before, and the fascinating stuff. But talk a little bit more about the product, and maybe talk a little bit about, if you can, kind of how you built it. I mean, the architecture, some of those core concepts. We are on the Big Ideas and App Architecture podcast, by the way, or so we have to do at some point talk about the tech. But yeah, just a little bit more about kind of how you built it and what problems it's solving.
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, we set out, right, we're a commerce-focused company. We set out to solve problems for merchants. And so we got into YC, and we were initially selling the product. It was really all geared towards merchants, right? A lot of the store owners that, want to operate, they might be operating a mid to enterprise-sized company, and they're saying, look, I've got a whole bunch of tools. I want to connect those together. So we're solving that problem for them. They don't need to hire an engineer for that. We've got some great customers using the product today. Folks like Burberry and many others, Murad and so forth, that are using this. And those are some of the larger companies. We have many small merchants as well being powered by Alloy. We were hearing over the past several years has been that a lot of our partners, so the integrations actually that we are connecting for our merchants, were saying to us, look, you have these integrations. We have huge library today. We have over 200 integrations in the commerce space today. It's an unparalleled library for anybody in commerce. And we were hearing this over and over and over again. And so we were hearing that these businesses, these partners of ours, were saying, we want to actually leverage your technology to power our own integrations. So that got us thinking. And so we actually launched another product using the same technology stack, the same integrations, everything we've built, but on top of the existing technology called Alloy Embedded. And what that does, that allows software businesses to natively embed our technology in the form of an SDK in their product. So for instance, if you want to say, look, I want to build an integration to Shopify or Attentive or BigCommerce, that might take you several weeks or months or whatever to build that in-house. You're dealing with authentication, rate limits, and of course, all the mappings and so forth for the APIs. You can do that in a matter of hours with Alloy Embedded. And so you just pop in our SDK and you're off to the races. And so that's our second offering. So we have our merchant-facing product, Alloy Automation. We have our business-facing product, Alloy Embedded. But at the core, we are all about commerce, helping people to enable integrations and to save time and money from building these things in-house, where you normally need to outsource that to an engineer. You can do that in a lower no-code environment that'll really save you a lot of time and let you focus on things that are more important to your core bottom line.
Yeah, and I think one of the, we get back into the tech, but I think, one of the things that I think is so interesting, given kind of not only what you're doing, but really the timing in which you did it, is we talked a little bit about this before. COVID obviously was a super disruptive force and not just COVID, as it turns out. I mean, I think the macroeconomic conditions over the last, 3 months with the war in Ukraine and all these other things. I mean, it's been a tough time in tech. It's been a tough time for businesses as they've had to navigate, all of the kind of the changing world dynamics, economics, et cetera. But I think for y'all, where it sounds like to me, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly from previous conversations, I mean, you kind of hinted at it just now. I mean, driving efficiency, really, your solution, is doing things simply for people that, if you didn't exist, they'd have to go build them or build these things themselves. So I think, one of the questions I asked earlier, and I think we probably already know the answer, we can guess the answer, but, how has COVID impacted the business, or how have all these things, kind of impacted the business? Because one would expect that, given what you're doing, it hadn't been as painful as it could have been.
Yeah, well, it's a great question because, if you would have asked me in March 2020, I would have been very, bleak outlook and said, the world's ending.
Why did I do this?
Quite literally. But it's been interesting in the sense that, think about what commerce, what happened in commerce during COVID, right? What happened was this massive tailwind shift to focus on e-commerce, right? People were, who were historically going into, a shop or boutique shop online, I'm sorry, in person rather, they could not do that anymore, right? And so as a result, because there were shelter-in-place orders and all these sort of things in effect, you had to go online. So these businesses also had to shift, right? So, there's always been Amazon and many other folks who have been champions on online commerce. That's not changing. But the shift that actually happened in COVID was the fact that a lot of these smaller retailers also moved online.
Yeah.
And so when they were moving online, who's powering those integrations? Because what's happening is when you operate an e-commerce store, you're never just saying, look, I have a Shopify store and that's it. You have all these other ancillary applications that are powering
Yeah.
your abandoned checkouts, your text messaging, your email flows, all these sort of things that are part of that commerce experience online are being powered by other applications. And so during that kind of migration to e-commerce over the past few years now, Alloy was actually in a very interesting position because we were commerce focused. So we were able to take advantage of those
Yeah.
tailwinds.
Yeah.
And then now, of course, we have this interesting environment, which has been challenging definitely for tech in the sense that there's been a lot of ups and downs. But folks are really now, of course, prioritizing the product features because they're saying, look, we need to pump out more features that are helpful to our customers. At the same time, many of those features often are integrations, right? And so,
Yeah.
you have
Absolutely.
companies that have smaller budgets. They unfortunately don't have the resources they had 1-2 years ago. They're saying, look, we still need to make ends meet. We still need to drive business, and our customers are demanding integrations to NetSuite or whatever else they're looking to do. But we don't have the resources in house to do it, and so that's a really interesting position where Alloy comes in, and we say, look, on our embedded product, we can save you a tremendous amount of time and, of course, money by having us power that technology for you. So it's been an interesting time.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, that's why again I was so looking forward to this conversation because I think just the timing of your whole story is so interesting given everything else. I mean, there aren't too many people who exit YC, literally a month before this all happens, and then happen to have a startup that perhaps thrives in this thing. Just as a quick note about Cockroach, I think we kind of found something very interesting as well. We're obviously this database that's multi-region and can do all these things and resilience and horizontally scalable and all this other stuff. And we kind of found a similar thing. Here, the world is going crazy, but some businesses that were online, we're seeing this huge spike in traffic and growth, and the technologies they were using were kind of, I don't know, not able to scale as easily. And so for us, thankfully, although personally very challenging from a business perspective, we saw, I think, considerable growth over this time too. So it's been pretty neat. So let's shift, if we can, just to some of the architecture. I mean, what do you guys, what's the kind of the stack like? What's it built on? And then maybe if you're comfortable sharing, in 3 years, did you start out down one path and realize, oh, whoops, architecturally, we need to maybe do something here? I mean, just not only we want to hear what you've done, but maybe there's some lessons learned along the way, some gotchas that you weren't expecting.
100%. Oh, I would be lying if I said there were no lessons learned. So plenty of things we've learned over the past several years, things we've done right and things we've not done so right.
Sure.
But at the core, right? So our tech is, we're big believers in JavaScript, right? So the technology itself, and a lot of TypeScript on both the front end and the back end. It's been really great, obviously, because we can have folks to really be full stack engineers and kind of pivot around very quickly. That's been fantastic for us. In terms of the infra itself, so we got to get on Cockroach one of these days. We unfortunately are not at this point in time, but I think you are making a strong argument, and we've had some calls offline about this. So one of these days, maybe that's my answer to the next 3 years, actually.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
Got it right. So, in terms of our database, we're on Mongo at the moment. So we're Mongo and DynamoDB. And so we use kind of Dynamo for caching because at Alloy, if you think about the business, right, we are ingesting a lot of information, right? There's a tremendous amount of information coming in because we are subscribing to all these events, right? So for example, what I mean by that is we're subscribing to, a merchant or a customer might say, look, I want to say when a checkout is created in Shopify, do this and this and this. So we're subscribing to all the events possible to make sure that we can listen in and then take the action accordingly. And so if you think about that for a second, obviously we're ingesting this information. We need to store it temporarily in caching mechanism and then send it out somewhere else. So using Dynamo for a lot of caching, using Mongo as kind of our core database for just the general kind of day-to-day operations of the business. Or in AWS, so we've got a multi-region architecture on AWS. So we've got some data centers on the East Coast in North Virginia, and then the Western Oregon region. Hopefully international region as well coming very soon. And that is obviously because we service customers really all over the place. And commerce doesn't sleep. You've got we're not just servicing, of course, the customers who purchase Alloy. We're also servicing their end customers, right? Their end customers being end users or merchants. And those folks could be anywhere. I mean, those folks could literally be anywhere. So we've got some great customers like Burberry, which of course is in the
Yeah.
UK. We've got folks
Yeah.
like Amazon, which is a massive company that are a customer of ours, and they're all over the place. So being able to have that multi-region architecture has been tremendous for us. That's been a big focus for us. And then a lot of Kubernetes. In technology, we use a lot of Kubernetes, and we are looking in the future, and kind of going back to your 3-year comment. A big focus of ours now is how do we take some of this stack and actually move it to serverless. We've looked at this before in the past. It's an interesting challenge for us because there's serverless. Obviously, these are on-demand resources. So there's resources that they kind of spin up and spin down as you need them. And there is a certain degree of latency involved with that if you're needing to warm something up quickly. But we are looking at ways to possibly to get around that and to kind of move off some of our technology from just pure kind of standards in the server-based Kubernetes infrastructure into kind of a hybrid architecture moving forward.
It's really interesting. So, at Cockroach, we talk a lot about serverless, and I think serverless is one of those kind of words that maybe mean different things to different people.
Right.
So, and certainly Amazon, I did a talk on serverless, like database stuff a while ago. And my recollection of getting prepped for that is that, Amazon, I think in a lot of ways kind of started the serverless game with Lambda. And so at least in my mind, like early days, like serverless meant Lambda, but I think it may very well have, and I think has evolved beyond that. For y'all, what serverless features or functions are you leveraging? Or kind of what piece of the puzzle is it? Because it's not probably at the persistence layer, I wouldn't imagine, but more at the like, hey, I've got to go ingest this event or do some kind of transformation. I mean, tell us a little bit. Not me, well, you tell me, but tell us,
Definitely,
all of us.
Yeah, 100%. Well, you've got, two of the kind of services that come to mind. You're spot on, obviously, on Lambda. Lambda, Amazon started the whole serverless revolution with Lambda itself. You've got things like Fargate as well, right? That is a big service. And for those folks who don't know much about Fargate, it's a tool that basically lets you kind of do on-demand Kubernetes. So you're basically spinning up kind of pods on demand as to saying, look, I'm going to have a dedicated cluster and have all these resources that are kind of already predefined. And so that's something we're looking into actually as well, because currently we use EKS, the Amazon service to manage Kubernetes, but we're looking to kind of offboard some of our infra to that, the Fargate tool and also Lambda. Specifically, kind of what we're looking at is we're saying, well, how do we take some of these like longer running jobs and include those on our Kubernetes cluster? Because we have a mix of jobs that come into Alloy, right? You have some jobs, and this is a complex problem in the world. We're always thinking about how to solve this. You've got some jobs that might be. Well, let me rephrase. Here's an example. So a customer might come to you and say, I want to do two things. I want to sync all the historical orders from my store to my application. I've got 10 million orders. It's a lot of data, right? And it's not just that it's a lot of data, but we're bound by rate limits. So, for example, if we're pulling from Shopify, there's a rate limit. We've got to retry, and we got to wait and paginate. It's a long deal, right? It's not going to happen in 10 seconds, right? So that could take, that could very well take, if we're saying 10 million orders, it might take 10 hours. Don't quote me on that, but there are it could take quite a long time. And so what's happening there is if we kill the server, right, that job gets killed in the middle of the job. Not a good thing. So
that's never happened. That has never happened in Alloy automation.
Never. So long story short, we've thought a lot about how to handle that sort of situation. And then conversely, we've got jobs that are real quick. Hey, look, when an order comes in, stream that one single order to another platform, or do this or that or whatever, something really straightforward, right? And that might take, I don't know, 100 milliseconds, less than that, right? So you've got this polar opposite world where you've got a tremendous amount going on, in the sense that you could have a 10-hour, 10-day long execution, and then you've got a scenario where the job might run for 10 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. So balancing that is a really interesting thing for us. And so we're saying to ourselves, well, how do we persist some of those larger jobs, right, on maybe our core Kubernetes infra for the long term for those kind of jobs, but then we offboard some of the more simpler jobs to like a serverless technology. Currently, that's all running in the same queue, in the sense that we have different kind of worker pods that do designated work, but we're looking to say how do we offboard and kind of fragment that into to using serverless. Because I think serverless is a tremendous opportunity for those softer, smaller running jobs where we can just turn it on, turn it off, and we're done.
Yeah, and I think so too. And if I'm curious on your thoughts on this, or if this is something y'all getting into, because we're building kind of this serverless version of our database, and I think one of the things that for us has changed is people, our customers want to consume things in a different way than they're used to. With, I mean, EKS and Kubernetes services are a little bit like this, but this idea is, you may not really have a sense of what your scale is going to be, or how much compute or storage you're going to need, and so kind of planning that infrastructure for the highs and lows can be difficult. I mean, I know obviously Kubernetes can scale up and scale down, but kind of one of the benefits of serverless, it seems to us, or to me, is that you begin to pay a little bit more kind of by consumption as opposed to to by node or some of these other things. So perhaps maybe a little bit more predictability, and certainly instead of having this giant thing that's always on that maybe isn't being used for some reason,
Right.
you can scale down to almost nothing, and then okay, a job comes in, I need to execute this small batch very quickly, spin up, do my thing, and then go away. And I'm not paying to keep the lights on. I mean, do y'all think about some of the kind of the efficiency there, almost from a cost perspective, or is that
No,
not a big driver?
It's a big driver. It's very top of mind. You think about kind of what we do, right? Is it different times of the year, different times when folks are planning things. Like Black Friday, obviously, you're gonna have a lot more traffic on Black Friday than you're gonna have in the middle of of June one day, right? Because for commerce, Black Friday is a big time, holiday season, right? Another big time. And so for us, to be able to quickly scale up based on the demand is tremendous. I mean, serverless is it's built as infinitely scalable, right? So you're really not worrying about, gosh, am I going to have to set up this monitoring system and worry about the cluster having a problem at certain capacity. Obviously, those things are problems we've solved, and we've worked around the limitations of a non-serverless architecture. But as we look to as we add more and more users, and we encounter more and more complex problems, I think that the scalability and also the cost is fantastic. It's we're in a recession, whatever the government says. I think we're in a recession, so everyone's thinking about cost cutting and being efficient with with capital.
If they say it, it must be true, right?
Absolutely.
Another, because I know we've talked a little bit about, you mentioned you're building on top of it, Kubernetes, and I don't want to get you in trouble here, but Kubernetes is one, maybe not as dramatically so as other technology topics, but there to me seems to be a little bit of religious fervor here. Like, people either love it and it's God's gift to everything. Some people, I think, are starting to maybe tire of it. I mean, what's been your journey? Kubernetes is not easy. And I think you have to have, quite a bit of skill, internally, or skill you can rely on externally to kind of help manage. What's been your journey with Kubernetes? Just out of curiosity. I mean, is it something y'all have had some great resources that knew it well? Has it been kind of a learning journey? I'm just kind of curious what your overall experience and then kind of thinking on Kubernetes as a tech is.
Yeah, I think we're biased. I mean, in the sense that, we started on Kubernetes, right? Yeah. So I think had we not started on Kubernetes, I might have a very different response to you in the sense that, if we're migrating or God knows what, that there's a lot of work involved in that. But we made an intentional decision in the beginning to say, look, we want to make the most scalable infrastructure as possible, and Kubernetes was a great solution for that. There's certainly a learning curve. There absolutely is. But how we've kind of architected our system is we've got the core kind of API running in one group. We've got what we call worker pods, and those pods are running another group, and that is handling the kind of the day-to-day jobs. We have another group entirely called like our long-running queue, and that's what handles those many possibly 10-day or 10-hour sort of jobs, right? So we've been able to take advantage of that substantially because it's just baked in. It's really easy to spin those up. Versus setting up an infrastructure around that, building it yourself is very difficult.
Yeah.
So we've been able to just use this tech, and for our business, been really great. I think it depends on the type of business you're operating. I mean, if you're a kind of more standard, web application where you're not maybe doing, job orchestration and really complex stuff like we're up to, you probably don't need it. I mean, it's probably overkill. You can probably honestly be really effective with a serverless tool like Lambda, and only rely on that, or have just an EC2 instance that does something great for you. But our
Well,
infra is a little bit more complex, and so we've needed to make
yeah,
those
it's just so funny because in my role as head of solutions engineering, sales engineering, I get to talk with companies all over the place,
changes.
and big and small startups, and very large enterprises. And it's funny, sometimes you talk to folks who just get enamored with the technology, because they've heard about it and they want to kind of bring it into their organization, or their CIO or CTO or CEO says, hey, I heard of this thing and we got to push this thing down. What we end up encountering is, you know, um, and particularly with Kubernetes, I think, because we're a database and you can run it on top of Kubernetes, but
Right.
we use stateful sets, and it's a stateful service, which is not traditional Kubernetes. But you end up getting folks who are like, "Hey, we're gonna run your database on Kubernetes." Oh, that's awesome. Do you have a lot of experience with Kubernetes? No, no, not too much. And it's like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Learning a new database technology is one thing, but trying to combine that with something I think as complicated as Kubernetes is like, it might be that might be a rather tall order. Um,
Great.
One other thing I know you and I talked about before, and just kind of curious, you're coming to us live from Hawaii. Um, and I know when we talked previously, I think you guys are using regions in the West Coast of the US and West Coast to East. Latency is like a thing, right? I mean, the speed of light is a thing. We can only get your packets so far, so fast. And I know you briefly mentioned, you kind of thinking about maybe expanding into European data centers. I mean, how obviously, given Cockroach, we like to talk about multi-region and resiliency and latency and all those things. I mean, how have you all managed kind of your infrastructure, latency, customer experience, knowing that you know they're
Yeah.
in different places, and depending how far you are from those places, different things can happen. Is that something y'all think about, or is that just what Cockroach people think about?
No, no, we think about it. I mean, I was in Dubai last year. It was funny. So I was in Dubai last year. We had actually an offsite there, and we did not have a multi-region architecture back then. And I remember sitting there, and we were working. We had a bunch of our folks there. And I was going, "Gosh, guys, our site is so slow." And they're like, "Yeah, it's because you're running out of North Virginia." I was like, "Oh, geez, okay, okay." So it's definitely top of mind. I'm in Hawaii for the winter, snowbird here, so very happy. Got nice weather over here, but Hawaii is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, Hawaii is a funny situation because there's not a data center in Hawaii, so we're the closest thing to us is we're processing through Oregon, right, which is the closest location I think geographically, or California, one of these data centers. But there's nothing really closer. But if you're a customer anywhere in the contiguous United States, having a close data center to you is really important for latency, and it's very very top of mind for enterprise customers. Example of this is Amazon, right? We work with Amazon, and for them, they need it. I mean, they have to have a certain degree of latency as part of an SLA. So we are very intentional on that, and going back to actually the serverless component as well. That's another great reason to use serverless, because serverless, I believe, actually has this kind of multi-regional architecture baked in. So when you fire a Lambda function, it's triggering off whatever is the closest data center to you. You're not even worrying about that, which is really really neat. If you're using a more traditional architecture like ourselves, you're using a tool like Amazon Global Accelerator, which will basically proxy that information over to the nearest data center to you. So if I'm in Hawaii, for instance, it's going to route that information over to, for example, our Oregon region. If I'm in let's say Kansas, or shouldn't use that, Boston, for instance, is going to route us over to the East Coast location. So it intelligently knows that. But that again is more intentional. We are thinking about that, and that is something that is top of mind for us. But I think Lambda and many of these serverless tools have it baked in, so it's a tremendous reason for us to leverage that further.
It's interesting. So we had our kind of our revenue kind of kickoff, revenue team kickoff this year, and our CEO Spencer came down and mentioned something which and maybe is a thing we'll start to hear in the world, or maybe it's already out there. But this idea of almost regionless, and I think in a lot of ways serverless is that way, right? I mean, it's no longer about which regions are you in. You don't even have to think about regions really anymore when you get to a certain level. Maybe you shouldn't be thinking about them. I just have some endpoint. I know it's always going to be up. I know it's always going to serve me correct data. It's going to be fast, and that could be anywhere. And I don't have to kind of consume myself with, worrying about if the lights are still on in Reston, Virginia, or wherever that data center is in Oregon. That's
100%.
awesome stuff. What do you guys think about, have you been in situations where, and do you test for, hey, this region's out of service, or are you routinely taking regions out of service in order to do, stack updates? What's been your experience there? And it may not be something everybody does. Maybe y'all aren't doing. I'm just curious if that's something that comes into play.
It's something we're looking at. I mean, how our system typically works is, so, how we've addressed kind of some of the actually concerns I mentioned before about, what happens when a job, gets shut down in the middle of an update, right? I mean, how we handle that is, so we will actually notify our pods. We'll say, look, you're running, for example, a long running job, right? We know this is going to take, you're looking to grab 10 million records, it might take 10 hours. We put that on dedicated infra, right? That's what I was saying before about that kind of that other set of pods that we have. And so we'll put that on that other set of pods. And then we'll notify that set of pods and say, hey, look, you have 9 days to finish these jobs. Go figure it out. And if you don't figure it out, there's an update coming, you're going to get shut down. And part of our, SLAs and our business facing, documentation and so forth is we're telling folks these things are not going to run infinitely because they can't, right? We can't, can't run a job for you for 3 days or,
it costs you a little bit of money if you did too.
Exactly. And also, other customers will be affected, right? So what we're saying is, look, there is a time limit, but we're going to power it down. And then for instance, for like maybe the shorter jobs, the things that are, just when the order comes in, do this, whatever, we give it, a much shorter number. I think it's like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or something reasonable offhand. Say, look, hey guys, here's the jobs, just know, when I say, hey guys, I mean the pods. Hey pods, just so you know, we have this new update coming in. Time to start powering off. So they finish their jobs. And then we power that off gracefully. And that's replaced by a brand new pod that has the updated code base, right? So what's nice about that is we don't really necessarily need to worry about, okay, we got to turn off North Virginia, proxy through Oregon, turn Oregon back on after it's done. Yeah, and that's built into Kubernetes. So that's another reason we like Kubernetes. But I'm sure our thinking will continue to evolve, as we encounter more challenging situations.
Well, I'm sure, just like I have. I mean, it's amazing. You think one thing is the right way to do it, and then a couple of years later, who knows where the
always a better way, right?
There's always it doesn't seem that way. There's always some new thing on the horizon, some new better way. Well, maybe that's a good segue. I know we're kind of running up on time, and you've been very, very generous to spend this amount of time with us. Maybe if you don't mind, leave us with kind of final thought about what you're looking forward to this year, whether it's personally or professionally at Alloy. Just would love to hear kind of what you're excited about going into 2023 here.
Well, I'm always excited about our tech. Our tech is, I think it's really, it's a challenging problem. And I think, I'm an engineer by trade. I like solving challenging problems, and our team loves solving challenging problems. So that's always a big thing for us. But what I'm really excited about, honestly, is hiring more people. We're growing the team. We're in an interesting position in the sense that we were able to raise money, fortunately, actually before the economy started to collapse last year. So we're in a good position. And, we're still hiring many open roles. It's a good time for us in the sense that, unfortunately, a lot of other companies are laying off. But we're able to to have the opportunity to hire more, and so it's really been fantastic. So I'm excited to grow the team. Get more folks, get more talented folks on the team, and the company and everybody, we all level up together, right? So it's a win-win situation for everybody, and super thrilled about that.
Well, Gregg, that was awesome. I really, really, really enjoyed the conversation. Learned so much. You've got such, like I said at the beginning, I think such a fascinating founding story. You guys are building great tech at the right time. So really enjoyed spending time together. And hopefully we'll get you to consider Cockroach sometime in the near future, but we won't push that hard.
Come on. That's on our next 3 years roadmap, like we just discussed. You got me.
That's all we ask. Just get it on the roadmap. All right, Gregg, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks again for joining us on the Big Ideas in App Architecture podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, take a moment, leave us a review, give us 5 stars, tell us what you think. It would be certainly much appreciated. Look forward to seeing you again every Tuesday.